We're going to go ahead and jump right into the next panel titled Artificial Intelligence under America First Antitrust. I think that this will be equally as interesting. AI is rapidly changing the world and changing American policy as well. So please welcome our moderator, Josh Levine, the Director of Technology Policy at the Foundation for American Innovation, and our panelists.
Well, thank you to Aiden, the Bull Moose Institute, putting all this together. Excited to be here. I know it's been a long day. Still more to come, so hopefully we'll I'm gonna have a little fun here. So I'm Josh Levine, Director of Technology and Statecraft, the Foundation for American Innovation. We're 501c3, focused on kind of just that, as policies and frameworks that spur American innovation. Joined today by three kind of experts in their issues: Luther Lowe, who runs public policy for Y Combinator, the premier startup incubator out in San Francisco; Joe Jerome, who is the manager of public affairs, lead government affairs for DuckDuckGo, which is a
Senior Public Policy Manager,
Public Policy Manager, pardon me. And Nathan Lemur, who runs Building American AI. Is that what we're going with it today? Great. All three men who spend a lot of time in DC know a lot about these topics. We're going to have a wide-ranging conversation. But first, I think there was some news yesterday out of YC. There's a bill that was introduced out in California by State Senator Scott Wiener of SB 1047 fame, if you remember that fight from a year or so ago. This bill is called the BAST Act. It was introduced with Gary Tan, who runs YC. So I'd love to give Luther a chance to talk about that and get some reactions from the panel.
Sure, thank you. It's great to be here at the NPC with a bunch of non-NPCs. Everybody in this room is a main character, so it's great to be here. Wow. And I have to say, I'm not, my views, I should caveat, are not the views of YC and myself, but not don't necessarily always represent the MAGA movement, but sometimes there is alignment. Yesterday we had a really exciting announcement in San Francisco, which was the rollout of, we talked about 1047, which was this kind of bad bill that was going through a couple years ago that would have regulated AI. We've gotten this numerological good luck or bad luck, because the bill now is 1074. It's called the BAST Act. It's the banning anti-competitive self-preferencing by entrenched dominant platforms that Senator Wiener, who is our local state senator in San Francisco, is banning. And it's very connected to the AI issue, because we also read, and I think this got brought up on the last panel, but I think to pay attention to the whole thing, that Apple is blocking all of the vibe coding apps. And so we really have to kind of take a step back and think about, with the President Trump's leadership and initiative as it relates to AI, and the ambition and the optimism that comes with that, how are we going to diffuse the fruits of this incredible, LLM-powered moment? How are we going to make sure that this technology, everybody benefits? And the reality is 20 years ago, I'm going to go riff for a second. I'm going to shut up for a lot of the panel, because I think it's an important point. 20 years ago, we were able to Web 2 was democratized because of the rise of browser-based HTML editors. Anybody could create a web page or a web site. Today, anybody can create an app or a web service through vibe coding. And unlike 20 years ago, where it was an open web and we had a Google that diffused 100% of that traffic to the web, today we have a Google that keeps 70% of its traffic to itself. That's as a baseline on desktop, and the worst DMV in the world in the form of the Apple App Store. And this is finally getting reported out by major technology publications that Apple is basically this massive bottleneck for all this incredible innovation. So we need competition policy. Competition policy and AI policy are inextricably linked. And so yesterday was about trying to remedy some of that by introducing a bill that, some have described it's ICOA-like or DMA-like. Sure, whatever. We can, quibble about details. But the idea is to inject some oxygen to end the egregious self-preferencing that the largest players are engaged in, and to diffuse some of this innovation into the hands of consumers.
Nathan, I'd love to have your take on this as someone who's long kind of been involved in, particularly on the right, noting the anti-competitive behavior by Apple, locking people out. And this has been was a kind of thrust of ICOA, but also this kind of tension on the right where the DMA has also been a target of the president, of the administration, as kind of a challenge to American sovereignty in the digital realm. How like this kind of legislation being split between those two places, how do you kind of think about this, maybe the larger question of federal and state?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we live in a world where states are the laboratory of democracy, and there's all sorts of legislation coming out. Some are ones that I can be excited for, like the right to compute in New Hampshire, and others we're still evaluating and checking out. And as Luther mentioned, 1074, which it's 1047.
It was 1040.
1047 was the bad one.
Bill.
You like the 1074. Got it. We'll make sure that right. So I've not read 1074.
I like them both.
Yet. I haven't read 1074 yet. I will say I'm excited to see Gary Tan, particularly just be engaged in the political process. The Gary's list is really exciting to kind of see that kind of movement of like kind of taking back ownership of San Francisco and the opportunities there. I have not read this particular legislation, but it's better than 1047. I'll give him that. I'm excited to see that it's better than that, which again was a really problematic bill because it was, honestly regulating math and a very problematic piece of legislation that kind of started, I think, a larger problem that I see that I think the Trump administration is combating, which is a lot of poorly written ideas that would balkanize the internet and make it very hard for the future of AI to be diffused. And so, if 1047 changes that, then that 1074 goes a little differently. Then that's exciting. But I think we're also on the cusp, I think, of the larger conversation, which I think a lot of us are waiting with bated breath for the president's team to release kind of their guidance about what they think the AI national framework should look like. And I don't have any inside information that I haven't already shared with Ashley Gold. I'm joking. I know she's here. I figured she'd appreciate the shout out. But I think we're all kind of waiting to see what's next and kind of see how that plays out. So.
It's a great segue to I think let's talk a little bit about the federal framework and federalism in the context of AI. Obviously, there have been multiple attempts to try to pass some kind of a preemptive vehicle at the federal level. This is in response to the kind of deluge of state bills, which I think it's a little complicated. There have been some bills that I think are truly would be harmful to the continued development and diffusion of this technology, whereas lots of other ones are kind of benign, and we'll see if they really have the overall effects. I think SB 53, which is now in California, which is a transparency bill. If you have a model that is trained and is able to do certain level of computational work, it is, you have to do some reporting around its potential risk, but it doesn't trigger any kind of new liability, kind of in my understanding of the bill. And this has been held at a framework. Senator Blackburn released her preemptive framework yesterday, which is a combination of bills that are kind of all over the spectrum. Interested kind of from all three of you, how you view this, do we need a preemptive framework? If we do, what do you think needs to go into it in order for it to survive and actually be viable for the American people? Or are states better positioned here? Like, is this Base Act an example of something that we should see kind of more broadly?
I'll jump in. I'm caught between two rhetorical wizards here. So I work at DuckDuckGo. My background is as a privacy attorney, so jumping into competition has been a real eye-opener for me, and I want to thank the Bull Moose Project for inviting me here today so I can get to experience some of this antitrust discussion firsthand. From our perspective, as again a company based on protecting privacy and with frankly a corporate mission of increasing trust online, it's our view that let 100 flowers blossom and let's see what happens. Now, obviously, there are laws that are good, bad, anywhere in between. And in an ideal universe, we would love to see the federal government put in place clear rules of the road. The problem is, because of our background as a privacy company, we've found that the federal government is just utterly unable to do that. We've spent years as a company advocating for federal privacy legislation. That continues to go nowhere. And so now to have conversations where we're just going to not solve the privacy problem, now try to preempt states' efforts to engage in AI, we see that as highly problematic, particularly since, look, we at DuckDuckGo offer AI tools. I would plug everyone to go check out duck.ai, but we're really concerned about some of the risks that come with this technology. And the reality is, at this point, the federal government hasn't really grappled with what those risks are. The states clearly are, and they are responding to public demands. And in general, we're just finding Congress is immovable on all sorts of stuff. We're here to talk about competition. Competition in Congress seems to have really just, it's like pushing a boulder up a mountain. I mean, I'm super excited for the fact that YC is, championing a bill at the state level, because the reality is California might be more effective at doing competition reform at this point than the federal government. And if they're going to be the lead on competition, they might as well be the lead on AI and privacy as well.
I was thinking, we're first off, I'm really upset that Aiden didn't get a TV placed here, because I got like I have like a 5-leg parlay that's going on right now, and I'm
Ohio
doing
State
my
went
best
down
not to watch
already.
it. I know, don't even get me started. But it would have been.
It is 5 legs.
To be fair, it would have been YouTube TV. Anyway, just shout out to my guys. Because they always have the streaming great. Anyway, no, it's a side note. But I was thinking about Howie Roseman, Eagles general manager. And it's always about making the deals, right? We have draft coming up, always making those deals. One of the things with a deal is you need a point of leverage. You need something that the other person wants, and you need to actually offer something that they want, right? That's kind of what we have here with the federal framework opportunity. There's a real opportunity to, I think, build off of the principles of the 4 Cs that, we saw Blackburn mention, we've seen the president mention, we've seen the illustrious Mike Davis mention. We see all these people across the kind of conservative space at Bull Moose Project talked about this idea. And particularly when it comes to protecting children and looking at issues around privacy and data, if industries, particularly rising emerging industries like AI, whether small tech or old tech or big tech, want to grow in that space, there's an opportunity here to make a deal. With privacy, there's no reason to come to the table, correct? For certain companies who want it to be the way it is. You have an opportunity now to have people come to the table. My concern with this federal framework idea is that you have earnest people who want to actually move forward on a federal framework, and you have a lot of people who have excuses for no. And so they're going to use little excuses, whether it's a made-up bill with a made-up name to sound like it's a real framework when it really isn't, or you have other options out there where they're just trying to scuttle one thing because it's going to, basically let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And so like Howie Roseman, my main man, always getting A.J. Brown for a couple draft picks, that's what you got to do. You got to make the deal. I'm excited to see the art of the deal play out here. We have a framework opportunity. You have kid activists, you have privacy activists, you have content activists, you have community activists. Come to the table, find a bipartisan opportunity here to put us on the right foot forward. We haven't had that before in other opportunities.
But conspicuously absent from this deal is competition, the 5th C, which I sort of teased earlier in the question to Metter. That is the I actually think that like MAGA competition heads are like dropping the ball here by not calling David Sachs every day, calling OSTP every day, calling all the AI heads in the Trump administration and saying, what are we doing here? If there's a vehicle that's being put together that is going to combine AI preemption, which is a good thing, and I'll explain why we like that in a second, and some of the kids stuff. Why can't we put the greatest hits there? ICOA, OAMA, access in this thing as well. I think Senator Grassley's team should be reaching out to the White House and doing this. And again, it kind of comes back to this this idea that if we're betting a lot, and the White House is correct to be optimistic about the potential of AI, but that potential is not going to be realized unless it can be diffused in a pluralistic way. And today, you've got 2 companies that are creating these choke points that are going to make this not actually roll out in an efficient way. So on preemption, though, the reason it's important is because we are, even though it's a popular whipping boy these days, that we are not, we are in a kind of a CDA 230-like moment. It's like 1995, and we're sort of looking at the future of technology, and I think that was a crossroads, and we made the right decision by coming up with an appropriately light touch. Now, there may be, it may be valid now to have conversations about what reforms make sense to CDA 230, but it feels like a similar type of time where if we come up with this, if we allow the states to come up with lots of sort of different derivations of their own ideas of how AI should be regulated, you're going to have little tech companies struggling to comply. And so, like, anybody who knows me knows I'm not a huge fan of the big tech companies, and it pains me to be aligns with them sometimes on certain issues. But the folks that are saying it makes a lot more sense to have this be a national standard are correct, and I hope that we can find some kind of deal which includes competition to get there.
Cool. Let's zoom back out then a little bit on what you all make actually of the kind of competitive dynamics of the market for AI products and services right now. I think if, for a layman or someone kind of like casually watching the space, you have, several different kind of talking about generative AI model providers who are, consistently racing with each other and beating each other on overall performance, evals, and features. It seems like at least once a quarter, if not more frequently than that. And then you're also increasingly, I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, businesses who are increasingly unlocking, particularly small businesses, who are unlocking tons of benefits from this technology. But there's also, the AI market, just like any technology stack, you have lots of inputs and lots of layers, and there's more or less competition across this. So, but before we get into your justification for this fifth C, Luther, like, what are you guys seeing in the kind of market? How competitive is the market right now?
Yeah, I mean, you got to kind of, what does AI mean? It's kind of like a few buckets, and we can get pretty granular on the whole stack, but let's just kind of break it into sort of like this, just be very simplistic and do like the software and the hardware. So I'll like save the hardware conversation for somebody else. The frontier lab, well, let's bring the three buckets: the hardware, the frontier labs, and the sort of edge applications of frontier lab creations. It is so exciting right now. It feels like when I moved to San Francisco in 2007. I mean, it's just like every couple weeks, these guys are leapfrogging each other, and that's what you want. We should have that type of dynamism in search, in social media, and smartphones. Like that type of dynamic is what we've been craving for 15 years in other areas of the consumer technology world. So I think it's premature to kind of come in too heavy-handed in regulating that. Now, I'm not saying don't have umps on the field, but it's worth kind of keeping an eye on in terms of what are the misuses and being vigilant and having like speedy processes if people are abusing it. But it's I think it's a very exciting time, and the maybe asterisk to that statement is you are starting to see like Anthropic is being a little bit self-preferency on some of their API stuff. I mean, you started to hear complaints from developers, or you see some of the they pushed, I think, Cursor off of their platform or throttled their API usage, and so we have to. I don't know, if frankly, I think that's not 911 yet, because we still have lots of competition in the space. So presumably, Grok or OpenAI are able to serve those kind of edge users better. If for some reason Anthropic is being a little bit shady, that's the benefit of competition. So I don't know. I mean, I think it feels like it's like regulating AI right now would be like saying, hey, we need like we need to do ICOA in 2006 because Facebook is too big. Like that's kind of how it feels.
Joe?
But it's coming, right? Like, I mean, it seems like a blanket rule that if you're offering, a frontier model API to folks, you shouldn't be able to discriminate based on, competitive reasons, right? Like that seems like something we would all generally support.
Well, I guess it would depend on how you define that, right? I mean, that's I think the larger.
I kind of want to jump back to the Anthropic question. I mean, honestly,
you might.
Yeah, of course I would. I mean, let's be real here. They're trying to have a coup against the military. What are we talking about? Anyway, but like I'll say that for my comments later. But my bigger point with them is they've spent the past few years really focused on pushing the safety approach, which really is actually like in many ways a regulatory moat for themselves. And that's actually I think a bigger concern that I have, which is that you have one entity, run by a certain philosophical movement who is dictating terms to a lot of people and how they think about that. And I think that actually concerns me long term, like similar to the downstream kind of effects on potential vendors or developers. But the bigger question I have is that they've spent a lot of time working in these states using the guise of safety. We saw that with the Biden executive order from 2023, where they really benefited from it. They were working that out. And so for me, I do get concerned that if we don't have a framework that is like neutral, like you get, I'm going to a football reference, man. You got to have the football start in the middle, and you can't be in the neutral zone. I mean, we just got to have that situation where one entity isn't being able to leverage these kind of state regs and state rules and state initiatives to kind of push a specific one that helps them, and have a framework that's I think why the framework is so important, because it allows us to kind of level set there. Again, questions about competition, questions about how many C's we want to add. I'm sure we can find a 6th or 7th C. I just got to ask Mike how many can fit in his tweets. Luther, I think we get 5, 6 more, but I think that's kind of my bigger concern is how that entity can be using kind of safety as an excuse to push an agenda that would be problematic.
I guess the next kind of building on this point, Luther, you kind of started touching on it between different layers of the stack and the kind of like 3 big buckets here. When you're looking at, and I want to ask you this question as someone who's working with a lot of startups and seeing kind of this like burgeoning ecosystem in San Francisco, who's not just building a front, they're tooling around it, they're building layers on top of it, which is sometimes labs are absorbing and adding their own features, which then spurs new features, new development. What's like the big of the AI production function? Let's call it compute, data, and algorithms, which I think is talent. Where are we maybe most, and last panel was bottlenecks, where are we most bottlenecked? Or where do you like have the greatest concern of something creating maybe somewhere that someone could amass so much control over one that we would need to have some kind of a competition action?
And we're talking about on the frontier line, or just generally across all 3?
I think either, yeah, I mean like either, frankly.
Well, I mean, I think it's the distribution. I mean, just making sure that, I mean, it's, there's some people that are saying, well, it's amazing because you can vibe code your own app and then use Flight Test, which, if anybody's unfamiliar, Flight Test is the basically developer app on anybody's iPhone that you can download, and you can create like a bespoke, like I could create an app, and that's just, I don't know what my app would do, but let's pretend it has like, I don't know, weather in Washington, D.C. and like, sports scores and random like Kalshi stats, like you're alluding to some gambling. So we'll put some prediction market data in there, and it all lives in one app called the Luther app. And so I can like easily install that on my phone. I don't have to actually submit that to the App Store. But what if I made something a little bit more sophisticated, a little more interesting, just a differentiated service? Well, then you have to go through the App Store, and then you got to like submit all this stuff, and you got to sit in the DMV line. And so that's where I get a little bit worried, is that we really have just incredible potential. The amount of submissions and the amount of creation is just exploding right now. Is anybody in here vibe coding? Raise your hand if you're vibe coding. So it's like actually less than half. Like everybody should go home and download Claude Code and like just plop down the, start with the 20, but be ready to go for 200 a month. And like, it is life-changing. I mean, it's really incredible. I mean, I realize that there's sort of beef with Anthropic world. And
Codex is available as well.
Yeah. Just pick. Yeah, I guess you pick one and go nuts and start doing stuff. It is incredible. And so, I think you think about that and you extrapolate it to the amount of potential that exists in terms of the creation of new products and services for consumers, and it's just so exciting. And then you think about, oh my God, what is it going to take to get those into the hands of consumers? And you look at the landscape, and you get really depressed.
So I think it's pretty clear where there's a bottleneck. So of the foundation models that are providing an API access, 90% of the market is controlled by 3 players. 2 of them have a big tech partner, and the other one is Google. So at the end of the day, it's the same major players that are going to be in a position to lock these things up. From our perspective, we think of AI as being really increasingly integral, not just to our business search, but also sort of web browsing. I'm curious. Let's do like a little interactive thing. How many folks in here use Chrome as their default web browser? Is anybody using ChatGPT's Atlas?
I have two computers, so one's
Okay, one has that. But all right, so I saw two hands, and there are people on stage. Is anybody using Perplexity's Comet browser? Again, it's two people on stage. My point is, everyone's still using Chrome. Chrome has Gemini embedded in it. Gemini is also going to be powering a lot of third-party tools. So you already have basically an ecosystem where the dominant player is already Google. And we're hoping and praying, I think, frankly, that OpenAI or Anthropic can sort of knock them off a little bit. And we have another panelist that doesn't even want one of them involved. So now we're down to two players, which sounds like a problem.
Joe's talked me down from my optimistic take. Okay, so I forgot about Gemini, and that's obviously that shouldn't go unmentioned. Is that Google has a history of parlaying its dominance from one monopoly into adjacent markets, and they're clearly running the same play here. I can't open my business enterprise G Suite and open a Gmail without getting self-preferenced. Hey, try Nano Banana. Try Nano Banana, and it's they're desperate to capture this market share. And I think whereas the labs are raising and burning through hundreds of billions of dollars, Google is sitting on massive cash reserves, massive data advantages, and so and then you have Judge Mehta in the US v. Google case, essentially greenlighting a deepening marriage between Apple and Google for Gemini to power Siri's embarrassingly stupid setup right now.
Because it wouldn't be fair if Google had to act like the other players and couldn't incorporate its AI tools into its own products.
Yeah, Google is poised to really, as the other guys duke it out, it could just be a thing where Apple becomes this sort of commodity hardware thing, Google's powering the AI there, and then they're able to kind of outlast everybody, and that's genuinely terrifying. Actually, connects to the lore of both Anthropic and OpenAI too. Wasn't it Elon and Sam originally saying we've got to protect? And you go back 25 years ago to Larry Page talks at Stanford, where he's saying the point of Google is to build AGI, and so it's the original OpenAI. It was actually born as YC Research. OpenAI was spun out of YC. Was a conversation between Elon and Sam, and I might be botching the history a little bit, but apparently, according to Elon Musk, at least what I've read, is that they were sort of terrified that Larry Page was going to run away with AI. So it's wild that dynamic is still kind of playing out.
I do think you're getting at something, and even with the my thoughts on Dario, there is I think a really important value to having this real race here within the U.S. The fact that we have a handful of companies, we also have emerging ones as well, and we just got to create that kind of culture to allow them to be successful. And the one thing I was also going to point out, and it also includes Claude and stuff. Mark Cuban last week tweeted out about this new data from I forget what the source was, but basically the growth of small businesses in the age of AI. And what was fun for me is reading the replies of how many small startups there were. And there were particularly guys who were like, I'm an engineer in Indiana, and I started this new project that relates to car mechanics, and I'm growing here. And I was like, that's really cool. And I DM'd a few of them, and now we're all chatting and back and forth. And it's been this interesting kind of space where I'm seeing people play into this. And again, there's a way of talking about the larger players, but also the smaller entities within that, where you are having small startups, you are having these guys be a part of the reindustrialization of the U.S. across the country. And the only way we can kind of bring that back is through this, enabling of AI. Josh, you and I were in the Gundo a few months ago, and the vibe and the culture there. And for those who don't know, Segundo Valley, right outside LA, it's just a cultural vibe where you have a bunch of relatively more military defense-oriented space tech companies starting up, but they're all it's kind of crazy. They're the antithesis to Silicon Valley. They're all conservative Republicans. They all take breaks during the workday to have Bible studies. They have bonfires in the evening to hang out. They're just it's to be fair, what, to be honest, the Bull Moose Project culture should be a bunch of if the West Coast Bull Moose was that's what we should be wanting across the country. And so for me, yes, we could talk about some of the quibbling in DC that we've had in the competition space, and I respect you guys on it, but I'm also what are we, as long as whatever we're doing here is enabling those guys to grow, that's what I'm most excited about. And so again, like maybe what's going on, some of the legislation plays into that, but like we cannot lose sight of the fact that whether it's Joe Wells or whether it's some of the guys we met online, like Caleb Max's crew and what they're doing in Virginia, like that culture needs to be a huge part of what we're doing forward. And like I hope the Trump administration gets that as a part of the federal framework, that's the focus to enable those guys to grow.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And it's, we have this question about the competition for AI around like the technology itself. But then I think there's the equally, if not more important question of what kind of competition does AI enable in terms of it as a tool? How are people using this to start small business? We've seen record small business growth, I believe, over the last 2 to 3 years, particularly the last like year and a half. It's really accelerated, even in the face of financial and market headwinds and some uncertainty based on various different kind of policies, both here and abroad. I would be interested, Nathan, from your kind of perspective here, is like building American AI is really focused on this, like how American AI is enabling American businesses and American innovation. What are the stories you're seeing, and how do we catalyze those stories more? Because I think your point, I think some of this you've said about Dario, some of the things we've heard from other people who are proponents of more regulation in this space are fear-based, and I think unfortunately many of the large tech company CEOs play into this. Maybe it's a marketing tactic to goose their investors. Maybe it's to enjoy some regulatory capture. But like, yeah, we'd love to have you kind of speak on this and how you attack this problem.
Yeah, I think it's actually a larger problem than Build American AI. Our group is a C4. We're focused on the political story, talking about the policy fight here in DC, and working with candidates through Lead in the Future, our super PAC, to find and identify pro-AI candidates who are supportive, excited about the future, optimistic about the future of AI, both on the left and the right. So we're working across the country in that state and federal races. But like what I stumbled upon this like realization that like there's a separate chasm of like telling the positive story of AI, and people are so inundated with the negative side. And what I'm fascinated by is when I see the positive examples. There's a guy, Chris Marston in Utah, that I've met up with. Him and his team are builders. They're me and my tower builders. I freaking love tower builders. I climb 200-foot towers, 400-foot towers, hang out with them. The biggest growth for those guys recently is not just wireless towers, but actually building data centers. And this guy Chris is like, I'm running for county commissioner in Utah. I'm like, why? And he's like, because those guys are a bunch of idiots and they won't let me build. I want you to just build. And I'm like, we need more guys like you. Like, that's the culture we need. I mentioned Joe from Indiana. He's a union tradesman. Like, what a cool story to be like. In the evening, I started vibe coding. My brother started a construction company about 4 or 5 years ago. It's been rough for him. It's a hard job. It's hard with tariffs. It's hard with all that stuff. Sorry, I can't believe I said that. But anyway, point is, wood prices, yada, yada, you get it. You know what's been easy for him? Bookkeeping now. For the first time, he's able to actually do the bookkeeping he needs to do in a timely fashion. For my little brother, that's awesome. That allows him to like have more money to be able to pay for the 4 or 5 guys in his team to do their construction crew. By the way, Sasquatch Construction, based in Oxford, Pennsylvania, great company. But I love to hear like my brother, who's a construction carpenter, who's actually like using AI to like be able to do new things. Like those stories, we need more of them across the country. I'm excited about the Reindustrialize Summit this summer to kind of meet with more companies who are doing that. I'm sure Luther will be there and others will be there. But like the Hill and Valley next week will be kind of an opportunity to hear from more companies who are doing some really cool stuff in that space. But it just can't be these top entities. It has to be the full story. Luther talks a lot about little tech, and YC gets that so well. It's got to be across the board, hearing those stories.
Yeah, it's a great segue. So Luther YC is famously been public about some of their data of the amount of AI that is being used to power kind of the next generation of startups and companies that are coming through. So we'd love to hear from you, like how you and how Gary is thinking about this, how your founders are thinking about this. Like, do they see AI as more of a complement to them, whether they're doing software, they're doing hardware, or is this something that they are, like, how are they integrating into their product, and how do you see this changing kind of the competitive landscape for maybe entrenched businesses? And I'm gonna go to Joe after this.
So, yes, I mean, basically every company we're funding now is in somehow either they're pure AI, some are like kind of the research lab category, some are, we've got NYC this batch, the ARC Prize, which is the actual like kind of the standard, the sort of third party measurer of all the different models that they come and they participate in sort of the art prize as a way to gauge like how well our AIs or our frontier models performing relative to each other. And then there's like companies that are building maybe hard tech or things that are sort of adjacent to the Gundo stuff that Daniel was talking about, that where just operationally AI has become really important because maybe they are able to make themselves more efficient. Yeah, it's everywhere. What was the second part of your question? Sorry.
No, just like how that's changing. I guess
I mean,
like building in San
speeds,
Francisco.
I think it speeds up. It's like it does two things. It's kind of a double-edged sword. On one hand, it creates sort of a lot of opportunity in the sense that you have these founders can very quickly like ramp up a minimum viable product and like attack a market. On the other hand, it's like lots of other people can do that, so there's lots more competition. So does that actually mean that the market is less interesting? So therefore, should we pivot to something else? And so I feel like it's just, and then the more like incumbent companies, like I think company like these sort of traditional, heavier kind of B2B SaaS companies that everybody just sort of takes for granted, like, oh, well, we're all gonna like sign up for Workday or whatever. It's like a lot of that stuff, you can just kind of like hack together a pretty bespoke version and get and so that is like having a negative effect on those companies, obviously. So it really kind of depends on what part of it. Now, some of the picks and shovels company, I think Supabase is a Supabase, Vercel. Like Supabase is a YC company. That's one that like helps with the hosting piece. And so you'll notice like if you do vibe code like a web service, it will, and then you say, okay, like I built this whole thing on my computer. Now I want to like launch it onto the web. It'll say, okay, you need like an actual like legit kind of secure server to host this on, and the guts, the back end, like you should maybe consider signing up for Supabase. So like Supabase has had like explosion in usage, and so a lot of the kind of picks and shovels companies are doing really well.
Joe, I want to come to you. This point about like being able to hack together software yourselves. Famously, I think SpaceX or Tesla is now saying they're going to build their own CRM. Other companies, for us internally, we constantly are like, do we really need to pay for another seat on something, or should we hack it together? How are you guys internally at DuckDuckGo leveraging AI to improve not only your search product but like building out new things?
That's a great question. Let me ask again. How many people in this room are using like AI services? I mean, Luther asked, okay, so most people, because I think that's something that DC folks are generally resistant to. And, DuckDuckGo is a pretty small company, and I'm the only U.S. policy person. So, I'm thinking I have a lot of expertise in understanding how to write congressional one-pagers and whatnot. But like within DuckDuckGo, there's really been an ethos of trying to be faster. Like whenever you're describing an AI application that can make people more efficient, I think that's stuff that we're generally supportive of. Our engineers are increasingly using Cursor and other tools to try and iterate much faster, build better internal dashboards. That it's really impressive stuff to see whenever we've got our internal hack days and you've got folks, literally one person pulling together some stuff from code that would, and it's not even just that like I'm not a coder, but it's the speed at which they can do that. Projects that would have taken them a week is now taking them a day, and we're seeing that in our ability to actually ship product out there. At the same time, again, I say we really are a mission-driven company. And there's a lot of like, look, I don't want to deflate the bubble. This is probably not the right room for that. But there is a lot of like legitimate concern about the ethics of AI. This is not an ethics of AI panel. But, as a company, as we have rolled out these, been encouraging folks to use more and more tools, I mean, we've had a lot of internal like requests for like guardrails on what we should and shouldn't do. We've implemented like AI trainings, both in terms of how to use the tools, but also what you should and shouldn't put into them, which, there are all sorts of sensitive documents, and that we just we also are a company that has we wouldn't call it user data, but we're getting lots of sensitive queries, and you mix and match data sets, you can have some interesting or really problematic privacy risks. And we would also highlight that again, the nature of these tools. It's one thing if you're a coder and you're just putting code in there. People are having really serious dialogues with tools in terms of just performance evaluations, trying to convince superiors or other folks how to do certain things. And I think it's our position that compared to sort of the way people were doing search queries in the past, the dialogues that people have with chatbots are incredibly sensitive. And we've our leadership has really gone a long ways to try to assure people that we're not looking over their shoulder, and I think that that's something employers are really going to have to deal with now. Like the reality of AI surveillance. I'm saying this as an AI company, but also our CEO is just like AI surveillance is a real thing, and we ought to grapple with it. And we also should ensure that we're not creating a dynamic where these tools, the infrastructure that powers this, is in the hands of a handful of companies.
So you mentioned your CEO is someone who cares deeply about privacy and this idea of surveillance. It's something that I've been struggling to understand a little bit is why AI surveillance is necessarily different than previous forms of surveillance, whether it was through cookies and third-party attestation, whether it's tracking your search data. Do you guys have, is there a clear line that is driven? Because I think that to me is gets a little close to oh, well, just like how companies you'll blame AI for laying off workers, right? When it's are you really adopting the AI? Are we sure you're using it?
It's because it makes being creepy easier, right?
Yeah. Look, I don't want to oversimplify it, but the reality is, you're talking about cookies and targeted ads. It's one thing to make some assumptions and inferences based on I'm going to some porn websites. I'm going to the proverbial going to the shoe website. It's another thing when you're bearing out your soul to an AI chatbot, which increasingly lots of people are doing. How, and I think the other reality is we've got a couple of frontier models that are trying to monetize through B2B relationships. But at the end of the day, I think there's there's not for nothing. OpenAI had a lot of backlash when it announced it was going to start putting ads into its chat stream. Meta's already done this. Now Meta is a 20-year privacy disaster that has been largely unregulated, and now they're going to be putting AI into all of their smart glasses and their AI, all of their AI tooling. That just supercharges debates that we have yet to actually resolve, which is why I started off at the beginning. We don't have a privacy rule in this country. We have a lot of, look, I hear the patchwork argument all the time. I appreciate it. But at the end of the day, these companies and consumer AI is largely unregulated when it comes to privacy, and we don't have a path forward there. And so these players, if they're not going to be acquired by the big players, are going to try to find ways to monetize. And I think we run a very risk that a lot of the monetization methods are going to be not just creepy, but inappropriate and probably scandalous for some folks.
I love what you said about surveillance. And your company has been at the forefront of the conversation on privacy, and I appreciate that. And I know that in the past, I don't know if it was with your previous team, I used to work on the surveillance issues a lot. It happens when you work for Justin Amash, you're required to work on surveillance reform. Back in the day, long time ago.
I think 702 is coming back up again.
Pre-2016, all right? To make sure everyone knows, pre-2016. Left that when I did. Got the USA Freedom Act passed, and then we got out of there. But what I was going to get with that was, surveillance has been an issue that I've cared about for a long time, and we work with DuckDuckGo and some other companies who've cared about that issue too. But I will be frank, I am frustrated at one particular company, I mentioned them before, who claims to be concerned about surveillance reform, and FISA is going to be passed next week, and I haven't seen a darn thing about it. No memo, no legislative proposals, no lobbying efforts, and you look at open secrets, there's nothing. So they claim that, oh, we care about surveillance, we're really worried about mass surveillance and AI, but then Anthropic has done literally nothing about it. It's absolute, like crocodile tears to no end. It's like, me when I feel bad for my friends who's a Cowboys fan when he loses. I'm really sorry for you, buddy. Really sorry. It's like a joke. It's like you don't really mean it. Because there have been companies, yours is one of them, Proton and others who've actually been part of these discussions for a long period of time, I think they've earned that kind of credibility in the kind of civil liberties community that they can actually speak for that. And I think that, to your point, it is an issue. Like, surveillance is going to be an issue. It's not what we're talking about, but like, it is an issue. But like, we need the people to be genuine. If they're going to be talking about it, maybe they should be talking about it before it's helpful in a PR stunt, and actually engaging on it holistically.
Sure.
I'm going to pick up on a thread that Joe set, which is is Meta and specifically Meta and AI. And I will say, you know, you talked to me a year and a half ago. I was going around town saying, "You're not going to believe I'm going to say this, but Meta's actually been an amazing actor on AI. They're releasing the Llama open source model, which is really exciting. They invest billions to train, and that's great stuff. They taught me how ICOA should have been thresholded, which is in their terms of service. They have Llama says that you can look, Joe and Luther, you guys can create an AI app with Llama model and commercialize till the cows come home. You can commercialize it as much as you want for free, up until the point you get to 700 million global users. Then you got to call up Uncle Zuck and come up with a deal.
Michelle in the previous panel may argue that doesn't make it qualify as open source, but
anyway, whatever. So, but they were good guys on AI, and they completely set that on fire because they announced a few months ago that they are pushing all the chatbot apps, and it's some of the big guys like OpenAI and Perplexity, or Perplexity's not that big, but like within the AI space, like big-ish. But it's also tiny apps, startups, little tech companies like Poke AI. So if there's these, a popular way for young people to interact with these LLMs is through these chat apps. So it's like you're not like getting on a desktop device and saying, treating it almost like a Google-like inquiry, but it's like your buddy that you're texting with. And so the form factor for a lot of the younger people is WhatsApp. And Poke is like this company that's just been like exploding with growth. They're worth like over $100 million. Top VCs have poured in like almost 15 million or a little bit more. Anyway, the Poke CEO was at YC headquarters. It's not a YC company. He was at the YC headquarters yesterday unveiling the Wiener Bill, because it turns out Meta has basically announced we're going to push out all these WhatsApp accounts because we want to basically self-preference Meta AI and make sure that that's the thing that is in your face. And I got to say, like, it's hard to, you add up the behavior, the conduct by Meta. When I open Instagram, it's like, I click on the little heart or the like. It's like, did I get a message? It's like, oh, nope, there's this thing on Threads, an app that you haven't opened up in like since 9 months ago when you downloaded it originally, because you were like confused, like, what's this Threads thing? I'm going to download that. And it's like, you can't hide from the self-preferencing, and this is egregious self-preferencing. So I wish Meta were still kind of a white knight on the AI stuff, but they're not.
I want to pick up a little bit on the open source point, because I think this is an important question that I grapple with, and a lot of other people in DC grapple with, is this idea of competition domestically while still racing and competing against our chief adversary, which is the Chinese Communist Party, who, if you're familiar with the AI companies that are most powerful and most broadly used in China, many of them do rely on open source models. They do have some closed models that they use for specific PLA military capabilities, surveillance, things of that nature for their own domestic population, likely also international. But there's this problem of trying to commoditize the generative kind of model layer. And I've talked to friends in SF, and lots of them are using some of these Chinese models, or at least kind of the tooling built on top of them, because they're really good and they're open and they're free. How do we square kind of that circle of like ensuring, like, is just more vigorous competition regulation and enforcement here the thing that keeps us ahead? Is it the federal framework? How do we balance our desire for domestic dynamism while still ensuring that we can lead? And candidly, I think that leadership includes both our large tech companies and, frankly, our innovators and kind of new entrants. So I'm interested to hear how you guys kind of are balancing and thinking about that dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, two things. I mean, I think we still need to be hawkish on the chips, which it seems like we're slipping on that. And then Another thing, I mean, I know it's not a hot topic in MAGA, but talent. I mean, Naval Ravikant, the AngelList founder, had a great tweet. It's basically, he said something to the effect of like, it's our Chinese versus their Chinese. If you read the academic papers from the frontier labs, it's like basically almost 100% of the names are people who have come to the U.S. on student visas or on O1 visas or H1Bs and are like excited about basically creating and working for these like U.S. companies and creating all this stuff inside the U.S. And we can be super draconian about saying no. This is I'm not being fair by saying this like, oh, we can get these jobs to people. We can upskill people and have them work in the labs. Like that's not a fair character. I've literally never heard anybody say that, so I'm not going to use that straw man. But the point is like we need to be. YC's position on this stuff, at least on talent, is that we need to be brain draining the world of these people and like bringing as many into the U.S. and having them be part of our freedom and creating here. And I think that's going to give us the edge. In the meantime, open source AI is it's like no crying in the, well, not no crying in the casino, but it's all's fair. Like this is going to be, and by the way, not super sympathetic on the distillation stuff either. Like because it's like, if Gemini is getting distilled, cry me a river, Google. And so like, I think that it's putting so much energy and fuel into the competitive heat. I mean, these guys are burning the candle at both ends in the frontier labs in the U.S., not only duking it out with each other, but also getting all this pressure from Quen and forgetting the name of the other major.
DeepSeek is the one.
Oh yeah, of course, DeepSeek. So yeah, I mean, I think it's welcome. This is they're in the arena.
So I want to reiterate what Michelle said on the last panel about sort of we have to look at what the business model is about why folks are involved in open source, because I think the example of open source as being this community of developers that are building something together isn't how it often looks at all. And a great example of this is again Chrome. As part of the Google search case, there was, the Department of Justice was asking for the court to order the spinoff of Chrome. And Google's argument, which the judge embraced, was that this open source project, the Chromium project, it can't survive without Google. It's too intertwined within Google's existing other products. And so at the end of the day, is this really an open source project? No, it's open source in name only, in the sense that Google is sponsoring all of this stuff to further extend its tentacles around. So all to say, my response to your question is I think we need to interrogate what we mean by open source. I'm repeating what was already said in the last panel. The second thing is, I think you hinted at this, like, do we just need regulation? I think the obvious answer is yes. All day we've heard that these cases take too long. I know that this is probably an enforcement-oriented crowd, and I'm a big believer in enforcement, but in not just Google cases, but all of these cases have taken way, way, way too long, even as we've recognized that there are some really interesting and challenging competitive dynamics within digital platforms. We have had legislative proposals out there now for over half a decade, and we need to get something across the finish line. Some of these proposals seem incredibly non-controversial. I'm going to paraphrase. I think what Luther's saying: egregious self-preferencing. We see this all over the tech landscape. It's not good for innovation. It's not good for competition. It's bad for consumers. It's bad for consumers' privacy. Nobody seems to want it. And, well, the only way we're able to address it right now is by having under-resourced regulators pick and choose their battles and try and, pull companies back from the brink when we just need to, pass a law.
I'm going to go back to my telecom FCC background and say we need to win international seminars and conferences the ways we haven't done in a while. Like whether it's the ITU, World Radio Conference, those things actually matter. Like those type of events happen. Like we set standards, particularly in the telecom space and particularly in the hardware space. That is so important to win, and we have not always done that, particularly from 2021 to 2024. And I think that that's something that needs to change. Whether it's losing the fight on Huawei for years and the way that is, I think that's a lesson for what we need to keep from happening when it comes to these emerging technologies. We need to do a better job of explaining why our Western approach to this is better and winning over those developing countries in those emerging spaces. So that's kind of like how I think is like just a different take that we'll want to kind of flag as a little different from the other thoughts here. But to me, that's like a central part of it, and that would just be the answer there.
Yeah, that's great. I guess that's interested. Like, if you guys are seeing, there's talk recently of these middle countries, kind of not China, not the United States, where there's lots of potential demand or there's potential. Are you guys? I mean, Luther, Nathan, Joe, are you guys interacting with or seeing new entrants or places that we should be targeting or thinking about how we ensure competition? New avenues of places to compete with these kinds of services or your own.
I'm going to take your question in a direction you're probably not meant it as you framed it, which is I'm going to kick a little bit of love over to Europe and remind folks that in Vice President Vance's speech last year at the it was last year at the Paris AI Summit. He name checked some EU regs that frankly we don't love either. DSA, GDPR, AI Act, but he, I think, conspicuously omitted the DMA. And the reality is that the Digital Markets Act is enabling little tech founders like Marvin, who I just mentioned, that is the founder of Poke, to actually have standing and have a fighting chance. Because what happened with Meta, to continue the story, is they're maliciously complying now. They're charging these WhatsApp accounts egregious amounts for API access, but they have at least unblocked them in Europe. And you're actually seeing this. We had the CEO and founder of AltStore, which is basically if you're in Japan or Europe and you buy an iPhone, you pull off the cellophane, boot it up, and you don't like the set of apps that you get in the App Store, you can download AltStore and you have access to a whole other set of apps. So imagine if you're a vibe coder and you're trying to get distribution, you don't like the worst DMV in the world, you now have AltStore. What do you think that's going to do to prices? What do you think that's going to do to the Apple VIG, the 30%? It's going to vanish because there finally is some competitive pressure on Apple to not overcharge. And so, unfortunately, I hate to say it at the MAGA conference, but Europeans are enjoying better protections than U.S. consumers. I don't know if anybody noticed this, but the Android a few weeks ago just pushed an update to all its users that you can AirDrop now. Did anybody notice that? Anybody catch that? You can just AirDrop. You can interoperably drop files back and forth with iPhone users. Google didn't tout it on their blog. Apple didn't tout it on their blog because they're both gatekeepers under the Digital Markets Act. This brand new consumer convenience that should have existed for the last 15 years, frankly, was unlocked because Google knew that Apple, if they try to push an update that breaks it, is going to basically face multi-billion-dollar fines under the DMA if they try to push an update that breaks it. And so they said, Apple's probably not going to risk it, so we're going to quietly push this out. Now, we don't want to say European regulators are awesome because we want to be able to self-preference on our stuff also. But I think it's kind of interesting how you're starting to see these consumer conveniences get unlocked. You're starting to see more competition kind of come out, and we should have this stuff in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add, look, there are opportunities to advance competition policy in areas that DuckDuckGo pays attention to. I think Japan, South Korea, Australia, even Canada a little bit are obvious targets. But the other, I think, practical reality that I think American policymakers just have not grappled with is the EU has set the tone as a practical matter. Whether it's the GDPR, whether it's the DMA, it becomes the model that other middle powers are looking at because it's the framework that exists. They might change it in some ways. They might effectively weaken it a little bit because they don't want to burden certain stuff. But they're going they're going to start with this model because the EU is a massive economy, and that's the way they're regulating it. And I'm taking from my privacy background. I've heard well-meaning lawmakers in Capitol Hill and at the states, we don't like what the EU is doing. We need to have a uniquely American approach. I would love to see that uniquely American approach, but like we don't have it. And a uniquely American approach cannot just be enforcement. It has to be a rule that that other folks other jurisdictions can look at to model off. Or otherwise, they're just going to go with what the EU has. You can't. It's not like you can go to a middle power and show them the Sherman Act. Like that's not going to be useful. So that's the practical reality, and why I keep getting up here saying we need some laws. Even if you're generally averse to regulation, you're skeptical of the legislative process. If the U.S. wants to influence these conversations in terms of like pen on paper, they need to put forward and enact laws that regulate these industries.
I just had another afterthought on DMA, which is that because the premise of an earlier question you made was that like admin is anti-DMA, and so I think that there are like light winks where there's actually a bit more nuance on DMA than is let on. So number one is that Vance conspicuously omitted it in the AI speech. The second was I read in Capitol Forum last summer that a close ally of President Trump, whose name has been invoked twice by Nathan, who's like the Leonard Leo of MAGA, Mike Davis. He is his organization filed a DMA complaint against Meta for self-preferencing by Instagram in a way that harmed the microblogging ecosystem. So like you got Mastodon, Blue Sky, X. Threads is the bad guy because Instagram is True Social. So I thought it was like a clever concept because we kind of forget that the president runs a little tech company called True Social, and under the DMA that could be entitled to standing, fine money, interoperability. Like if Europeans agreed with that type of complaint, they could you could see a situation where you're in Instagram or Threads scrolling or Instagram scrolling, and it's like if they want to promote Threads, then they have to also show like a carousel of other alternative services because they're illegally trying to kind of inject themselves into this adjacent market. So I think it's actually a little bit more nuanced on. I think on DSA, I totally agree with the framing, but it's a little bit more nuanced on DMA.
Okay, we're at 4 minutes left, a few minutes left. I don't know. Open up for questions. People have questions. Just name and affiliation. No questions?
That hurts.
Sorry.
They're watching the ending of the second half. They're getting on it.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, well, I guess closing thoughts. Let everyone I'll start with Nathan. You opted out of the last question, so.
Yeah, good discussion. I just wanted to, defer to the experts. I would say, I think it's really important to pay attention to this next couple of weeks with the potential announcements when it comes to framework and kind of, what we actually have movement when it comes to actually the U.S. kind of getting these rules into place to set basically a national, standard and kind of where we can go from here. I'm excited to see what that can look like. I'm encouraged to see the discussion, how it's evolved over the past probably year, and we'll just kind of look forward from there.
The fact that so many of you are using Chrome suggests that defaults really are sticky, and I'd encourage you to give some other browsers a try, whether it's DuckDuckGo or frankly one of the browsers that has, is trying to, be an AI first experience. That seems like the easiest way to experience some of this innovation right now.
If you're a MAGA antitrust head, call your MAGA AI head friends and say that the fifth C, there should be a fifth C, an additional C, and it should be called competition, and that should be baked into any kind of AI framework that is being worked through with the White House and Congress, because it's not only a golden opportunity to make a deal done, get a deal done, but it's also vital to ensure that if we are to, see the fruits of AI like reach the hands of consumers, we need to remove the bottlenecks. And so that's really, I think that competition and AI are inextricably linked in that way. And it's just so urgent that we do it right.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. Thank you to my panelists. We have another panel coming up.